Hey Chantal. Hey, I'm just about to post a related article. Um, hey, great. Anyway, hey, hello. Thanks for. I always I start when the first person gets here. So yeah. So welcome to lēmniscāta live at 5. Um, this is my second Facebook Live that I'm doing. I'm sort of a nervous person, so just please excuse my awkwardness. This is my little kitten friend. His name is Boom Boom, and he's a teddy cat. He's like a little teddy bear, kind of. But anyway, today's topic, or the title of today's live stream is Zone Zero, The Problem is the Solution, and the Truth About Triggers. So I'll talk about, the title a little bit more, but just to get started, I know, isn't he? He's cute. Our cat had kittens and I want to keep them all, but of course I can't. Anyway, so what I want you to do right now, just to get started, is to think of a time when you were super triggered. So this is what we're talking about, triggers. When I say the truth about triggers, I'm talking about when you get really triggered. Like, what are triggers? What is a trigger? What is going on when we're triggered? So if you're like me, it happens all the time. And for me, the thing that's coming up is this, I don't know, it was probably a month ago, I don't know, maybe a few weeks. I pulled into my kid's school and immediately, or no, what was it? It was in the morning, and I usually pick them up, but this day I was dropping them off and I pulled into this school parking lot. And, my kids are usually homeschooled. They've just been in school. My son has just been in school for the past, I don't know, a few months. Is a little, like free babysitting, a little bit of, just some other stuff to do. So we were dropping him off. Hey, Dina. I was dropping him off, and in the afternoon when you pick up, you can just sort of park and then go in and, anyway. So I just was like, I wanted my daughter to go drop him off, run out of the car, drop him off, and then come back to the car. And so I just kind of pulled over to one of the parking spots. And the woman who was like the flagger, she just ran over and she was like, hey, Rebecca. Hey, Michelle. So I'm talking about a time that I was really triggered, because we're talking about the truth about triggers here. So I parked, and she like sort of just came right over, and I just felt so like stuck. Like, here I am, I've got my 2 little kids that have jumped out of the car. They're already gone. I don't have any way to communicate with them, like where I'm going to be if she makes me move. And I feel kind of called out, like I should know. And like, I just feel like an outsider in that moment. I get really triggered and I'm really upset. Hi, Kim. Welcome. Oh, you see, this is Boom Boom. Everyone who hasn't met Boom Boom yet, this is Boom Boom. So I was really triggered. Now, the thing about being triggered is that I just want to preface this conversation with, just because we're talking about triggered and what might be going on with you when you're triggered, it doesn't really mean anything about the other person if there's another person involved in why you're triggered. So like, say for example, you get in a fight with your partner and you feel like he's being a jerk and you're really heated up about it. Doesn't mean he's not being a jerk, okay? It just means that you can work on you can work with you, and usually once you work with yourself, then you can more effective with other people. So anyway, okay. So that's my little story about how I my being triggered. So I hope that all of you can think of something that you were super triggered by. And if you can and you want, you can just type it into the chat. It can just be like a little quick summary or not. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about the title of today's show. Sorry, I'm sort of like always wanted to be a TV an actress or something, a movie star. So anyway, so we'll call this an episode, a show, okay? Just for fun. Okay, so I'm having a harder time thinking with this cat on my. I like always go like this, and so it's harder to think. Okay, so I have 3 things that I want to talk about. The first one is the problem is the solution. The second one is the truth about triggers and what's going on when we're triggered. And the third is calling it amplification and alchemy. And it's sort of like at least a theoretical way out of the trigger that isn't about, like what I did in that story I was telling you about, because I got a little bit huffy. So, sorry, I'm just thinking back. Anyway, okay. So number 1, the problem is the solution. So the problem is the solution is one of my favorite permaculture principles. And it's kind of like in permaculture, there's like a list of principles that kind of guide it. It's less about how to do this and how to do that than like having principles that help you kind of order yourself so that you can just be connected and listen and observe and know the thing to do instead of following always by rules. So, so one of these principles is the problem is the solution. So we're going to talk a little bit about this. So just to be clear, this isn't like that the solution is really somehow living in the problem, or that all problems have solutions, or that like you're just stuck with the problem as it is. Like the problem's the problem, like shut up, like that's not the point either. Let's see. So, what am I doing here? So, okay, so when I talk about the problem is the solution, I'm talking about something different, okay? It's just a little bit different than that. And it's more about, well, that's actually more about the number 3, the amplification alchemy. But so I'm going to go a little bit deeper, but I just want to like sort of just give like, so the problem is the solution. So if you think of a problem, and instead of like, often what we do is we want to like resist a problem or like fix the problem or solve the problem. This is really different. It's about like actually like being with the problem and sort of letting it actually be present and seeing how the problem itself is a solution. So I don't know, this is one of my favorite examples because I really was consciously using this technique was when, it was like 2009 or something, I don't know. It was right after the sort of the economic collapse, and we were filing bankruptcy. I had like a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old or something. My aunt with Alzheimer's we were caretaking her, and so we were in the middle of filing bankruptcy. It was just like really everything was hard, and we had some tenants at the time that stopped paying their rent, and so we were behind on paying that mortgage. And so we actually moved into that house because it wasn't even, it had needed some fixing up. Anyway, the point is that we started doing our bed and breakfast at that time. But of course the house was really rough, and there was we had goats in the backyard and chickens, and we had ducks, and it was kind of, there was poop everywhere, and we I mean, the house needed a paint job really badly. And so it was kind of, we were one of the very first listings on Airbnb. And I just kind of was like, okay, what if I just let this problem be here and I don't try to fix it? Hey, Joanne. Hey, Yolanda. And I think up here, Dina mentioned a challenge that she said, my mother has been challenging ever since I told my parents about buying our new house. Oh, interesting. Okay, so the mother, your mother, or yeah, mother is the problem. No, there's one you can't just solve, right? Okay. So the problem, so anyway, so we had this house. So what I did, because there was no way, I just didn't have the money for sure to paint the house and make it bed and this was before Airbnb took off. So like when people thought of bed and breakfast, it was like I thought that they wanted fancy. So I just thought I was going to experiment. So I just wrote it all. I just embraced all of our problems. I said, we are not like, like we're not a B&B with, you know, this resplendent hospitality. I think I said, we don't have air conditioning. We're a simple family. You know, I talked about that we are like, that we're like DIYers and that we're artists. Like I just put it out there what the real situation was, and that we are like a little farm, basically, that we have goats and ducks and chickens, and that people can help out with farm chores if they want. So the point is that instead of, I just let the problem, I just was like, okay, the problem is, and I just led with it and I just let it be there. At first I was kind of like just warning people about how it was going to be. And, you know, little did I know that Portland was just going to explode, and partly because of this, you know, sustainability, green Portland thing. So anyway, the point was that it ended up being that this thing that I felt like was a problem, like we were not worthy, turned out to be, when I just kind of held it in a certain way and even like amplified it a little bit, that it became a part of the solution. Like that saved our bacon. We would have just like lost the house if we hadn't been able to do that with all the pressures that were on us economically and within our family at that time. So, okay, so that's sort of an example of the problem is the solution. So I want to talk a little bit more about what happens when we get triggered. So this is kind of relating, I guess, permaculture and permaculture principles to myth mending or trauma healing, or, you know. So, okay, so when we're triggered, I think there's all kinds of like thinking out there about what triggers are, and I'm not going to name them. But there's a lot of like rhetoric around, like if you were good enough, you wouldn't be triggered. Like if you were, I mean, probably if you were all enlightened, you wouldn't be triggered or whatever. But like, so, you know, like if you have patterns or, there's a lot of guilt and shame associated with this. So this is, you know, partly what I want to address is that there's this idea, you know, this idea about triggers that you shouldn't have them or something. And the truth is that triggers are our body or our nervous system or our psyche's way of okay, I know what it is. You know, this is what it is that this idea that you bring stuff onto yourself, like abundance stuff, like all these kinds of, you know, philosophies around if you could manifest anything and that you can just do whatever you want. Like I tend to hate those kinds of things, but not because they're totally wrong, but because they're missing something really important. And that is that we don't, say we do bring things to ourselves. Like, for example, I have a pattern maybe of feeling like an outsider and doing the wrong thing and then getting pointed out, like this story that I started with. So maybe I just brought that on myself. Okay, so anytime that you have a trigger, anytime you're triggered by something, it's what it actually is your nervous system or your body or your psyche. Like a pattern is like your body pulling something, an experience into you, not because you're broken and damaged and messed up and flawed and like, gosh, would you get over it already? But in order that you have the opportunity to heal. Because triggers are, I mean, this is pretty basic, are connected to traumas, right? That's just like unresolved traumas. So it's a very different thing. And often I have people come to me to do work and or just people, friends, you know, it's like, or people expect me, they kind of put this on me to like, because I do some certain thing over and over again, like feel like an outsider. Because of that, therefore, I like, and there's a lot of like just sort of like you just like shift your mindset. This is a big thing, like shift your mindset. And that takes a lot of willpower. So this is the difference I want to say is like, what if there were a way to like, to not have to like do this whole like walk yourself through a mindset shift over and over and over again? Because the only reason that you have a mindset problem is because there's a trauma. And if you just like force yourself to have this good mindset all the time, you're actually robbing yourself of the opportunity to heal the thing that's connected to the trauma that your system is drawing to you. So it's a really different look at being triggered. Instead of feeling like bad about yourself because, oh, I'm triggered, or oh, I'm doing that thing again, oh, I'm in another bad relationship, oh, I keep getting the same kind of man, or whatever. So I remember I was at this, it was a pre-perinatal psychology training. It was in Mexico, actually. I remember this woman, she said, and I don't know if this is true or not, but it got me thinking. So I'm not giving this as theory that's true, but I can't even remember who she was, honestly, sorry, everyone. But she said something about that the whole reason that two people get together is in order to, like, you will always be with someone who is like your a parental figure, or someone that was important in your life that you are called to heal from the damage of that initial relationship moving forward. So, and she actually went so far as to say that two people who don't like trigger things from like sort of like say developmental trauma, as we talked about the 7 types of trauma last week, and you can go back and listen to that one. So if someone doesn't trigger you, this isn't the sign of a great relationship. He actually says, people, if you don't trigger each other enough, you won't be able to, you'll be infertile. You'll be an infertile match, which, I mean, that's just someone saying something, but it did get me thinking, because I do know that this is true about triggers. Okay, does that make sense? Everyone who is here? Someone type something. Oh no. Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, so, okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And if you have any questions, please put them in here and I'll sidetrack myself to talk about them. Okay, so that's the truth about what's actually happening with triggers. The problem isn't that you're getting triggered. The problem is It's not, the problem isn't even, although this is a start, this is maybe where we have to start, the problem isn't even that most therapists, even if they're trauma informed, don't actually have like a process, a healing modality that can help restore what's broken, what's what's unresolved or unnavigated or incomplete. And that it's you're left incomplete is so there's two layers. There's the layer that like psychology isn't handling this in any kind of efficient way. Psychiatry, psychology, and you know that's not really necessarily handling. But then the even deeper thing that happened before psychology started sucking, or I mean, I shouldn't say it started sucking. That the reality that it isn't really able to handle this is before that all the protective and restorative and preventative and integrative ceremonial practices or ways of holding innate, like ceremony, rites of passage that are just embodied experiences, including natural disasters, including childbirth, including menarche and menstruation, including, you know, all of these things, that we've lost our ability to hold what is. Thanks, Chantal. It's always nice to feel like someone's listening, so I appreciate you guys chiming in a bit. Then my brain doesn't have to be like, are you making sense? Okay, but, so yeah, so then I'm like, now what was I thinking? Okay, so not only the things that are like in nature, in the natural world, but also the things, hi Nasiba, oh Nasiba, hi Nasiba. Okay, but not only the things that happen, but also interrelational things. And you know, we're kind of, it's this exponential like fragmentation that's happening, because the sort of things that just happen that are resilience building, that ought to be resilience building, that are sort of archetypes for ceremonial practices that even further build resilience and strength in individuals and in communities. Those are all gone. And then because those are gone, we're all getting triggered, and we're all like interacting. We're just triggers interacting. And then the triggers interacting cause more trauma and like the over and over and overness, like the developmental kind that we were talking about last week. So it's just a mess, okay? So what are we gonna do? And you know, I've done all this work in trauma resolution training and curative story, indigenous story work, and indigenous ceremony, and family constellation, somatic experiencing, like all of these things. And for the most part, they're one-on-one, and they're held by therapeutic professionals. So that's something that I'm grappling with, hoping to participate in some sort of shift, so that these methods that can help us restore ourselves can be available to larger groups of people at a time, and also between us in a grassroots way, rather than, you know, this professionalized way. So I'm just looking at Chantal here. That's all the sacred things for us to be aware of our present state. Yeah. The thing is that Chantal is just saying that all the sacred things that happen to us and around us, that they're there for us to be aware, and that they'll guide us if we can stay in a state of being rather than a state of fixing, or say reacting, which is what we usually do with trauma. Which is, the problem is the solution is a kind of like intervention. You know, it's a little bit, you know, mindset shifty. So I want to take it a little deeper, like a step deeper. So that comes to number 3, amplification and alchemy. So this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about the lēmniscāta, and like this is lēmniscāta live at 5. And hi, Leah. I just want to talk a little bit about like what happens in the system in the healing process, okay, but also in how it in the broken, in the damaged state, okay. So I'm really I want to be careful about resting in thinking about damage and just considering people damaged. I think that it's really disrespectful to talk about someone else as damaged or in a way oneself, because, and I don't know, fragmented is maybe a little better word, but we still think of ourselves. I mean, those of us who have had lots of unnegotiated and unresolved trauma, it's really easy to feel really crappy about yourself, and like year after year after year, just feeling like you're a failure, and like just I know for me, it just comes in wave. Like, I don't know what hit me, and all of a sudden I just feel like, what's the point? So, okay. So number 3, amplification and alchemy. If I made a jump there, tell me if there's anything that I just skip to and you don't get, just type it in the chat or send me a question later, because I can also fill in a little in pieces. Okay, so everything in the world, well, I talked last time about, like, you know, duality, and about that everything has a polar opposite to it. Like, you just pick anything and it has an opposite. Some things are really clear, but this is just kind of it's a beautiful truth about the world. There's night and there's day. We're not going to get rid of night and day. And while there is noon right in between night and day, and there's all the variations in between, there's also the polar extremes, night and day. So, that, you know, there's hot and cold, positive and negative. And so I'm going to stop for a second on positive and negative and talk about positive and negative. The way I learned it, as I remember learning it in the somatic experiencing training, is that polarities, hi Darla, I haven't seen you in a while, that polarities are kind of like an electric current, okay? So if you think about trauma and triggers, and you think about like ease and response, and like, you know, light and dark. I'm going to get these backwards. I have to be like, wait, I'm going to write this down here. This is the positive side. And then the other side, I have to remind myself, this is so then I point, I'm not confusing everyone. So this, on this side, we have the positive. On this side, we have the negative. And, you know, like in with electric current, you would never say the negative current is bad. You would just say the negative is the negative and the positive, and you need to have both in order for it to all work. So this sort of reminds me a lot of the constellation, Bert Hellinger's work in constellation work. It's an amoral process and of healing. Hey, Madrona, mwah, mwah. I love you too. Thanks for coming by. Thanks for swinging by. Oh, stretch. Okay, so we would just never hate on the negative current. We wouldn't think to do that, or we'd never try to eliminate it, because then you would never have energy. Like we need both of those to create the power. So, and there's this thing that they do in Waldorf schools, and I learned this actually not through Waldorf teacher training, though I have started that and someday might finish it. But I learned it, I did it with Jaap van der Wal. He has this incredible program called something about the embryo. It's just a beautiful, beautiful 4 days. I was just weeping, but on the last day, what he brought us through. Thanks, Joanne. Oh, I have so much love. I know, the kitty. Okay, so he talked about, like in Waldorf schools, like I don't know what grade they do it, but they're learning this thing about dots. So you go, he had us do it. You go on your paper and you go dot, 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 just points. And it has a certain kind of feeling to it. And then you do lines, like it has a certain kind of feeling to it too. And then I think he had you do circles and you just go around. So it's like around and around and around and around. And oh my gosh, Madrona, have you done that program? Oh my gosh, it's beautiful. So you go around and around and around and around and around. And that is like, so they all have these different qualities to them. And then he says, he gives you the lēmniscāta, right? Which is why this is where the kind of the root of lēmniscāta is. And my somatic experiencing teacher, one of my mentors, he also used the lēmniscāta as a way of talking about trauma and what happens in trauma. So, oh, there's a little footy underneath. Oh. Okay, so when you actually go to do the lēmniscāta, it's like, it's got circular, it's got straight lines, and it's got this point in the middle. And it's like this, hum, 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 hum. And the idea that this is a working nervous system, right? That there's rhythm. And this is not just nervous system like in the human body, but like any duality or polarity that you can find, the hot and the cold, that they ought to, that in us an organismic, like unfragmented state. So I'm just going to say, like, kind of, it's just a little bit utopic, right? But it's like that it will have this rhythm. And that if you have positive and negative, hot, cold, any polarity you put on each side, that and that there's a kind of, they don't collapse. Like this is like the whole idea of like good and bad, get beyond good and bad to like some sort of like utopic oneness of nothing. That's just not, maybe that's what happens after this life, but while we're here, we live in the world of duality, that where you're not going to get rid of day. You're not going to get rid of night. You're not going to get rid of hot. You're not going to get rid of cold. You can break them apart, maybe. I don't know. I think those things are so solid that's a big support that we still have. Okay, blah, blah, blah. You guys basically following me with neither of these things is bad. But that what happens is the lēmniscāta gets broken. And then you have this polarization in oneself, and also it expresses in the world too, because we just get stuck. And they're actually like kind of I don't know, there are lots of kinds of people, but most people can be like in terms of trauma. I want to have my hands free. I'm going to say there's two kinds of people, but don't hold me to that. Like, I'm not the kind of person to be like, say something. There's two kinds of people, but like that there's people who tend to, this is counterintuitive, there are people who tend to get sucked into the trauma vortex, and they're the people who are depressed or have suicidal feelings, or, I'm more that kind of a person. And then there's the people who, because it's broken apart, right? There's people who tend to be love and light and feel good, and it can end up being kind of superficial. So depressed and suicidal, that sounds negative, but this one can be really superficial and uncompassionate and unable to like and fragile. Okay, so but both are fragile. Okay, so anyway, the point is that what we want to do is start getting these things connected again, not collapsed into one, but connected and functioning. And so what happens in the nervous system when we do, it's really, and that's, you know, what I think ceremony does when it appeals to things, these sort of things that don't get broken, like night and day, hot and cold. You know, these things can help remind our nervous systems what to do. But, right, like we're talking about trying to restore these practices that prevent and integrate and resolve trauma and prevent trauma, but through building resilience without being icky appropriators, right? So we're not just going to go, I'm not saying to never participate in Indigenous ceremony, but most of us don't have easy, you know, most, even people with Indigenous ancestry don't necessarily have access to those ceremonies. If you're here and you do have Indigenous ancestry, I'd love to hear from you. And I have a separate project that anyway, I'd love to hook you in with that. So just, you know, contact me if I can tell you more about it. We're just planting a little seed. Anyway, the point is, if you're not, then this is another way to restore. And I think that as we restore individuals and groups and communities, that we can start remembering the ceremonies and the ways of holding birth and of holding mothers and holding ceremony around rites of passage, natural rites of passage, natural disasters, and also just the fragmentation that we see in the world, that we can start restoring that and come up with, you know, rituals and ceremonies that aren't fraudy, that aren't fake, that aren't copycatting, that aren't stealing, that aren't, you know. So, and then once we get to that place, then we're actually in a position to participate in cultural sharing, and then that will be a wonderful time. So anyway, so those are the three things. The problem is the solution, the truth about triggers, and amplification and alchemy. If you have any questions, please let me know. And if you want to, I think just above or maybe to the side, I put a link to one of these little exercises that, sorry, I was just seeing Madrona say, I love you, Madrona. Talk to you soon. Mwah. There's a little exercise that you can go and click and download and listen to. You can put it on your phone and listen to it. And it's it's like the very basic process that I use with people when I work one-on-one with people. And so you can go and get that there. And so there's that. So yes, the problem is the solution, the truth about triggers. When you're triggered, take a pause, see if you can, you know, at least don't beat up on yourself about it. And see if you can just be with the problem and let it amplify itself. So the amplification alchemy is just about seeing, there's this thing called, I call it the opposite trick. And whatever you are, you know, on the side of, if this often happens when you're doing something that's triggering someone else, that you're kind of on the triggered side, and you're, you know, that you can, try to, well, let's just talk about when you're being triggered, just knowing that there's another version. When you're being triggered, what you can do is you can just take that thing and just amplify it just enough to really see it and be with it. And then what you just ask yourself, what is the opposite? And then wait for the image, just go with the first thing that comes to you. It has to be on the other pole, not because we're trying to be happy all the time, but it's like if it's an opposite of the image that you're triggered by, then your system will throw out something that is going to help you hold space for the other thing. As Chantal was saying earlier, if you can just, you know, be with it, then you can, state of being will help you just stay in a state of being, so that, and then the solution usually can arise, even if you can go back and forth between that opposite image and the problem trigger situation. So yeah, in SE that's called pendulation, and it basically starts getting the poles connected back together and relating to each other. And then when rhythm starts happening, that's when we start like seeing new possibilities, things we never thought of before. And that's where we want to be coming from with each other. Not, you know, hopefully that's where we can start moving toward. Okay, so that's everything. That's lēmniscāta live at 5 with, this is Boom Boom. You can just talk at Boom Boom here. The little thing that you can go click on the link, it's called Soft Animal. And this is an example of like a little soul that has just, you should see his mama. She is like such a wonderful mama. And he is just a soft animal. He knows exactly how to respond and what the moment needs. Look at that. Boom, boom. Okay, so, okay, Dina is saying, I'm in the process of setting up our homeowners and earthquakes and natural disasters. Huh, interesting, yeah. Okay, cool. So if you're still there, I'll see you next week. If you have any questions, send them to me. Oh my gosh. And I will answer them. Just PM me. Okay, mwah.